So for those of you who may not be familiar, EAM is the affiliate of the Academy of Management, the premier organization of management scholars worldwide. Of course, given the topic for today's presentation, our audience is not just management scholars, but everyone who wants to accomplish more. With that said, I'm also pleased to welcome Dr. Emily Balcetis of New York University, the author of Clear Better. When I read the book some times back, I was personally very impressed with the stories and the message in the book. And I'm thankful to EAM, Learn and Share, which gave me this opportunity to host Dr. Balcetis here in this virtual series. My sincere thanks, of course, to Dr. Balcetis, who accepted our invitation to present to this audience. Before we proceed further, let me introduce Dr. Balcetis formally. For those of you who may not be familiar, she's Associate Professor of Psychology at New York University. She received her PhD from Cornell and a master's from University of Nebraska. She's the author of, I don't know, more than publications and has a TED Talk that has been viewed more than 1 million times. This talk today is Clearer, Closer, Better, and she'll use insights from the book to explain how academics, PhD students, faculty, and others can become more productive, achieve more, aim higher, things that we all care about. With that, I'll request Dr. Balcetis to take us to the next stage, her presentation on how we can aim higher and accomplish more based on her book. In terms of format, we'll have a short presentation followed by questions from the audience. Thank you, Emily, and welcome.
Thanks. Thank you for this opportunity. I am very excited to talk with this group and for the opportunity to think about how directly to apply these strategies that I talk about in the book to our own world. that has been a fun mental challenge to take on. Let me share my screen with you. Great, and I'm going to start with a question that we can all think about. We can all entertain the same question to get us on the same page, and that is: have you ever set a goal that you did not meet? If you'd like, feel free to use the chat. The chat's already been very full of comments. As I see, we've cloned one of our most esteemed guests, it seems. Have you ever set a goal that you did not meet? I like Melissa's enthusiasm. Of course, that is my answer as well to this question. All the time, yes, 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 several times, yes. Me too. I'm not seeing any no's. I'm not seeing, I don't know what she's talking about. What is it, like what? Yeah, too many times to count, Usman, thank you. So this, of course, is a leading question. These are the answers that I get every time that I ask this question, regardless of who the audience is. There's a common cliche in life that the only thing that is certain is death and taxes. Those are the only things we can be certain about. But I actually think answering yes to this question belongs on that list. That's why we have New Year's resolutions as a thing in the first place. So my research team, as a behavioral scientist, my research team has been trying to understand why people make the decisions that they do, what motivates themselves, and what stands in their way of success. In the last 20 years of the research that we've done, these are the things that I'm certain about. The reason we can all say yes, or some form of yes to that question, is not that we are not setting goals. Of course, we're setting those goals. It's not that we don't care enough, and it's not that we're not trying. Those are some of the things that people tell us when we say like, oh, I just can't get this done. Oh, maybe you don't really want it. Or there's just not enough time for me to get this thing done that really matters to me. Oh, maybe you're not trying hard enough. Those are not helpful reactions that people often give when they hear a friend or a colleague tell them that they're struggling. These are not the reasons that we're having problems meeting our goals. What I want to talk about today are some of the common problems that we face, but offer some perhaps different solutions for us to try if we should encounter those problems. Now, there isn't necessarily there isn't a formula. I can't give you a formula and say, when you encounter X, do Y. If anybody is telling you that that is the case, that there is such a formula, then they're just selling you snake oil, because we are all very different people and the social circumstances that we find ourselves in are very different. So the way that I'm approaching presenting this work to you, and the way I approach it in the book, is just to expand our toolkit. That we will experience problems, and some of them are more common than others. But the same tool might not be effective every time we encounter that problem. Or if we continue to try to use that same tool to perfect what its impact is, it might wear out over time. So if we can expand the options that we have available to us of what the strategies might be that we can try or take on when we're experiencing different problems, we might increase the odds of success in meeting our goals, or at least help us get farther. So the first problem that I'll put out there is that we're oftentimes setting goals at the wrong level. We set the goals at the wrong level of difficulty. Before I dive into this, let me give you an example. Sometimes we can set our sights too high right out of the starting blocks, and that can lead to disaster. That might have been the case if you, during pandemic times like I, found yourself in the kitchen far more than you had before. And some of us were excited about that. Here's an opportunity to learn to cook, finally. I should have picked that up 20 years ago, but now is the time. And some people were really excited about that and took on this new challenge with gusto. If you found yourself in that camp, this might resonate with you. If you have no interest in cooking and the pandemic didn't inspire it, at least know that some of your colleagues did feel this way. So some people were really enthusiastic and decided, I'm going to learn how to cook. And some of them may have taken on a challenge like this. I'm going to go from not knowing anything to cooking a baked Alaska, creating a baked Alaska. This is a baked Alaska. If you do it right, what you have to create first is churning your own ice cream. Then you craft a chiffon cake that weighs as little as a box of paper clips. Then you decide whether you feel more French, Italian, or Swiss, and then create a meringue of that nationality. You turn your two-dimensional piece of rectangular sheet cake into a three-dimensional ball that surrounds your ice cream. You top that confection with that meringue that you just created, and then you toss the whole thing into a 500-degree oven. When it's set, you douse it in flaming liqueur without that frozen ice cream ever melting. The best laid plans are ones that are set at the right level. They can't be too hard, like this baked Alaska, or people will give up before they've even really started. If you set a goal that requires mastery of many already complicated tasks, or requires a rapid rate of progress of learning new skills, like the baked Alaska does, the pursuit of that goal might exhaust us. We might peter out before we've made it to the finish line. But on the other hand, if you set a goal that's too easy to achieve, oftentimes we sit back, unmotivated to move forward because we know the future rewards of accomplishing that goal just aren't that great. So goals that are set at the right level, that are moderately challenging but not impossible, are the ones that can inspire us most. My research team and I did a quick demonstration of this fact. We gave people a simple goal. It was a really easy experiment. It was tossing a beanbag into a bucket. Or you could imagine, hitting a bullseye on a dartboard. But importantly, we kept that target really close for some people. That bullseye was really big. That target that they were trying to hit was really close. And as a result, it was quite easy for them to do. For others, though, we pushed that target much further back. And now that bullseye is much smaller. That the bucket that they were trying to hit is much smaller and much further away. This was very challenging. But for others, we put it literally in the middle distance. This seems possible, but one that I'm really going to have to focus up for. Now, we did let them do the task, but that wasn't necessarily what we were focused on. Instead, we were focused on systolic blood pressure. Systolic blood pressure is the top number on your blood pressure reading. It's an indicator of your overall health, but psychologists, behavioral scientists also use it as an indicator of a physiological marker of energization, of our body's readiness to get up and do something. Now, people have studied blood pressure and systolic blood pressure in all kinds of animals, humans included, but also animals like racing horses. Right in the gates, right before they're going to take off to compete, their systolic blood pressure goes up in anticipation and when they're in that state of readiness to do something that's physiologically taxing. But systolic blood pressure in particular also goes up when we're preparing to do something that's just cognitive. We might be just sitting there, but we know that we're going to do a bunch of hard math problems. Systolic blood pressure goes up in anticipation. Our body is getting ready to do something that's related to our goals, and systolic blood pressure can track that. Now, in our little mini experiment that with the dartboard and that of varying different distances, what we found when we looked at systolic blood pressure was that it was higher when the goals were moderately challenging relative to when they were considered or construed as impossibly far off. Systolic blood pressure was lower. It's almost as if people were giving up when they mentally construed this challenge as just too big for them to likely accomplish. What's also interesting is that systolic blood pressure was pretty low, relatively lower, also when those goals were really easy, when that target was really close. They showed signs of physiological de-energization when the goals were too easy. It's the challenging goals that inspire us, that increase our engagement and promote action, that get our bodies and our minds ready to take on the challenge. And that's the beauty of setting goals at just the right level. When you hit that sweet spot, that's what can motivate people. So if we want a quick takeaway, then how should we go about approaching goal difficulty? Well, we need to think about what's an impossible version of this, what seems outside of the bounds of what's possible, and scale it back. But not go for the low-hanging fruit either, because we already know that if there's no question about whether we can get the job done, we're not going to feel that excited to take on that challenge, and we won't reap the downstream consequences or motivational benefits of having met that goal if we continue to set our goals too easy. The second problem is that we stop the process of goal setting too early. Here's an example of a vision board. Maybe you've made something like this, maybe you've seen them, maybe you call them dream boards. There's all kinds of names that they go by. The idea here, though, is that you create a montage of visual icons that reflect where you want to be in the future. You concretely visualize your goals. You put positive imagery out there on a board, and you put that board somewhere where you're going to see it every day, maybe in your bathroom, maybe on your nightstand. And the idea here is that with vision boards, that they encourage and foster people's own daydreaming about their future success. Maybe this doesn't resonate with you, or maybe it does. It is actually very popular. In fact, TD Bank did a survey of 500 small business owners, and they asked whether they use vision boards within their business. 59% of millennials in the group said that they did use exactly this strategy when they were deciding whether to start a business. 89% used the technique to develop their business plans. And 3/4 of all of those surveyed, regardless of their age group, said that they think vision boards work to give their employees an accurate sense of where the business aspires to be in 5 years. This is a strategy that people use when they're trying to think about what do they want? What is their goal? What are they working towards? And they use it also as a communicative tool to share that goal with other people. They're not wrong. Vision boards or any tactic like this, where you sort of visualize what future success would look like, can be helpful in promoting what goals you want to work on. Maybe helping you identify what those goals are in the first place. The process of creating something like this might help you to make concrete what might otherwise just be sort of abstract or random thoughts. However, counter to the claims, we're no more likely at meeting the goals if we just set these, if we just use the vision board approach. Okay, thanks. I'm glad that you can see the presentation, and sorry that some people are having a hard time. So there were some scientific studies that were done, in fact, by colleagues of mine at New York University. A team led by Heather Berry-Capras was looking at what happens to people when they just sort of stop that process of goal setting at the articulating the high level goal stage, when they just focus their energy on what it is that they want to achieve. Is it more likely to produce results? The answer is no. When people actually give up faster when their thoughts turn too often, or when they just focus their mental energy on what success will look like. People who focused their attention just on what that high level distal goal will be actually showed signs of bowing out early and giving up on their goals prematurely. like we did in the previous study, they too measured systolic blood pressure as an indicator of their body's readiness to get up and do something. And what they found was that people who focused just on ruminating over what that high level goal is, what is the long-term objective that I'm trying to achieve, they showed that their systolic blood pressure actually went down relative to baseline compared to people who thought about what it is that they wanted to achieve, but then started to think concretely about what it would take to get there. Those people sustained the same level of blood pressure, systolic blood pressure, as at baseline. Now, I'm all for finding ways to relax, but I think we could all use a little bit of it. But importantly, remember, this systolic blood pressure as a marker of energization is telling us whether people are getting ready to do something. So if we just focus on what success would look like, it's as if people sort of mentally consumed that desired outcome and their bodies relaxed. It's as if they felt a sense of goal satisfaction by simply having thought about what that long-term objective would be. They positioned themselves in that mental space of goal completion, and now their bodies and their brains are in a less well-prepared state to try to take that first step. So a focus on the far-off future can actually backfire because it sort of offers a vicarious satisfaction of the goal. And like those vision boards, if that's where we focus our energies and don't move beyond that stage of goal setting, we're less likely to actually do what we need to do to accomplish those goals. So what can we do better? Well, thinking big picture, knowing what we're working towards is important, but we need to couple that with concrete action planning at the goal setting stage. Let me give you a concrete example of how this can be effective. There was a study done within a large Dutch telecom company. They set an ambitious goal for the company, and that was to reduce their negative impact on the environment. They decided for the first few months of working towards a sustainability goal that they would focus on having employees reduce the amount of paper and plastic that showed up in the garbage cans that could otherwise have been recycled. So in each department of the company, they put in recycling boxes. There was a special team that repeatedly informed the employees about these recycling boxes. They told them about the importance of using them. They tied the recycling boxes to that high-level distal goal of sustainability. But despite being given that goal, the amount of paper and plastic in their personal waste baskets at their desk at the end of the night wasn't reduced. In fact, the research team swapped out some of the janitorial staff for themselves and every night collected the contents of all of the trash cans and counted how many paper and plastic items showed up in the garbage can that should have otherwise been in the recycling boxes. When you look at the number of items per week, what you can see is that at baseline, employees in this firm were throwing away about 1,000 items that could have otherwise been recycled. 1 week in, 2 weeks in, 2 months in to the sustainability goal with recycling boxes available, we can see that the numbers are not decreasing. The number of items that can be recycled that show up in the trash can was not going down, and in fact, it was trending upwards. Now, the research team expected that this would happen. They did not think that it would be enough to simply articulate the sustainability goal and provide the means to satisfying that goal. They knew that there needed to be some concrete action planning that went into the goal planning stages. So they asked employees to generate their own concrete action plan. Every member of the team thought about, what can I do today that's concrete, that is my own behavior that will align with this higher order sustainability goal that the company has articulated. They came up with things like, if I use a plastic cup, then I'll throw it in recycling. If I see old papers on my desk, I'll put them in the bins. This isn't rocket science. It's not magic. This is exactly what everybody wanted to see happen. But importantly, individual members of the team took the time to think about that concrete action, to commit to it. And if you're familiar with this work, to put that action into an implementation intention sort of framing with the if and then. If there is this cue, I have a plastic cup, then I will do this action. So they articulated that concrete action that aligned with that sustainability goal, and each person did it. It wasn't mandated on high. It was sort of a personal commitment that each member of the team had made to engaging in a concrete action that aligned with that higher order goal. And what you can see is a big effect of adding that concrete action planning element. At baseline with this group, about 1,200 items were showing up in the trash that could have been recycled. But 1 week later, that dropped down to less than 200. 2 weeks later, it stayed at that relatively low level. And even 2 months later, the number of items that showed up in the trash that should have been recycled stayed really low. And importantly, what happened between 2 weeks and 2 months? They made the action even harder. They moved those recycling bins away from personal desks into a central communal area. So even when it became more challenging to do the daily action that aligned with that higher order goal, they were able to sustain that behavioral trajectory, that new habit that was formed despite encountering a new obstacle. So big picture thinking coupled with concrete action planning can translate abstract, large scale ambitions into something that's tangible, that's present, that's in the moment, and it can have long lasting impacts on our individual choices. So how can we set goals better? Think big picture, that's important. What are we working towards? But at that goal planning stage, also start thinking concretely about what can I do today that's going to take me in a step in the right direction. Let me add a third thing to this list. How can we set goals better? Let's also add at the goal planning stage to start foreshadowing failure. When we are thinking about what it is that we want to accomplish and how we can start accomplishing it, we are going to better motivate ourselves over the long run by thinking about the obstacles that we might face and what we will do should we encounter them along the way. Now, for some people that might seem counterintuitive, that we're going to better motivate ourselves by thinking about all the challenges at the very early stages. I'm telling you, I'm really excited to try to take on this new thing. And you're telling me that I'm going to keep that excitement by thinking about how hard it's going to be, all of the ways that I might fail. How is that going to be helpful? Let me give you an example. This is Michael Phelps. We know his story probably, but there's some details that was surprising to me that I didn't know about when I started to dig into his backstory. He actually uses that 3-step plan for goal planning. He thinks about the big picture goal, he plans concretely, and he foreshadows failure. And that's a part of his daily practice routine. Back in 2008, he was on the doorstep of making Olympic history at the Beijing Olympics. He had already won 7 gold medals at the time of this story, and he had just a 200 fly left in front of him to do something that no one had ever done before. And that's win 8 gold medals in a single Olympic Games. As he dove in for the start of the race, his goggles started leaking. By the 150-meter mark, his goggles were completely full of water and he was swimming blind. Now, if I was in that position, which I never would be because I can hardly keep myself afloat in the pool, I would have completely panicked. That would have been the end of it for me. But he didn't. Instead of panicking in this last length of the pool, he just calmly switched his concentration to a stroke count, because he knew exactly how many strokes it would take for him to get from one end of the pool to the other as fast as possible. He already had thought about this problem of his goggles leaking. In fact, in practice, his coach would often rip the goggles off of his head and smash him on the ground so that there was no way he could even have them on. And he had to practice swimming essentially blind. He had already thought about this problem and he had the solution. He had the backup plan in his back pocket so he could calmly and effectively overcome this obstacle. He had mentally practiced overcoming this problem in advance. So when it popped up, he wasn't thrown off by it. He knew exactly what he needed to do, and he did it to win his 8th gold medal. Eventually, he'd go on to have 15 more. An incredible story. So maybe our day jobs don't put us into a swimming pool like Michael Phelps' day job does, but this 3-step planning can work for all of us. Scientists have found that people who incorporate this tactic into their daily routine accomplish more of what they set out to do. This research team set up smartphones to test this idea, and these phones pinged people several times a day for a week. And each time the respondents jotted down a description of one thing that they wanted to get done that day. What's their goal? At the end of the night, they reported how much progress they had made on that goal. But sometimes they also thought about things that they could experience that would stand in their way of accomplishing their goal and how they might overcome them. So this was a within-person manipulation. And they found that people who incorporated this tactic actually got more done. When you look at the self-reported progress that was made, those people who foreshadowed failure, in those instances when these people foreshadowed failure, they actually accomplished 50% more. There was 50% more progress that was made relative to those goals that they had simply articulated and reported progress on. Remember, this is within subject. These are the same people who presumably are holding similar goals. And so there's, all of the individual differences that you might think could account for this don't really apply in this case. It's that when asked or when prompted to think about what obstacles might you face and how can you overcome them should they arise, these people were better prepared to handle it, and they could push through those obstacles to get more of what they wanted done. So how can we set goals better? Putting it all together. Where do you want to be? Thinking big picture. At that same planning stage, breaking it down into something concrete and actionable, and taking time to think about the obstacles you might experience so that you can have the plan B and the plan C at the ready. Because should we experience those obstacles, that's when we're thinnest on time, our resources are least available, and we might not be in the best place to start creatively brainstorming how we're going to work through this. And that's why oftentimes people throw in the towel early, is that they hit a roadblock that they're not prepared to handle, and the situation doesn't allow them to work through it because they don't have that life jacket already easily grabbable. A third problem that I want to focus on is how do we think about time? And I think a lot of us, me especially, think about time ineffectively. This became really clear to me when I was working on writing this book. This opportunity I'm so grateful for. It's been a really fun process, but it came at the absolutely most worst time possible in my life. I was running my large research team, as many of us are doing, teaching as all of us do, all kinds of service opportunities, because I had gotten tenure, and tenure does not mean that you have more time, you have less time, because now they give you so much more to do than you ever thought possible before tenure. And I had just given birth to my first son. He was within the first couple weeks of his life, and this publishing company bought the book and said, now, great, go write it. And you have the first year of his life to get this job done. And I did not want to say no, but I just felt like this is impossible. There is no time left to do this thing that I really have wanted to do for a really long time, but I can't say no. So I said yes. And the book is about these strategies. It's about the obstacles that we face and solutions that we might try to overcome those obstacles. And I thought, well, here's the test. Like, I can put my money where my mouth is. If I really believe in what's going in this book, then I should use them on myself to manage these competing obligations that feel really insurmountable right now. So in the book is also my attempts at using my own strategies to get my life done. But also I decided to add on one more layer, which was, well, if I'm going to try these tactics, I want to try it within a goal that is going to be interesting to think about and to write about. So at this time of running the research lab and teaching and the service requirements in my department and writing this book, I decided I'm going to learn how to play drums. I want to be a rock drummer. I was talking about diapers a lot and feeding schedules and sleeping schedules, and I just felt like I'm really boring. I became the most boring person the day that my son was born. People stopped by, oh, how is it? How's being a new mom? How's your kid? And I just felt like I had nothing interesting to say. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to put a little bit more interest back into my life by becoming a rock drummer on one song. But we lived in a one-bedroom apartment in New York City that's smaller than most people's garages. We have neighbors that were already annoyed at the crying baby that they were hearing through the walls. And now they're going to listen to me learn how to play drums when I have no coordination abilities anyway. I was really risking being evicted. That was part of this situation. But it's a goal that I took on for myself, for my own, trying to carve out a little bit of me time within this really busy time of life. So I tried all the tactics that I'm sharing with you today, and I talk about my experiences, the true experiences of how they worked, maybe why they didn't work for me in trying to accomplish this goal. I'll just put it out there. I did meet the goal. I did learn to play one song on drums. I've performed it a couple different times. So, I'm a one-hit wonder, and it's not really that, I don't do that great of a job, but I can do it. So I at least have that little interesting nugget in my back pocket. But one of the things I tried was thinking about, how do I think about time? Because I was realizing that the more that gets put on my plate, the more myopically focused I am. The more that I'm just trying to get through the day. And then tomorrow, I'll figure out tomorrow. But just today, that's all I can think about. And I started to think that that's probably doing me a disservice. My, trying to put out today's fire and worry about tomorrow might actually be creating or perpetuating or allowing more fires to keep burning. So my research team and I and a bunch of students who wanted to play this game with me decided, like, let's try this out on ourselves. Let's think about, how do we think about time? So we thought about goals that mattered for us, goals that couldn't be accomplished in the day, not in the week, and probably longer than a month. And we tried to figure out, how do we allocate time to make progress on the goals that matter? So for 1 week, we woke up, thought about what that goal was, and every day we planned, what can I do today that's going to help advance my progress? And we slotted in time into our calendars for that day. And at the end of the night, reported how much time did I spend working on that goal. In comparison, in another week, we thought in a bigger picture. We woke up on Sunday, thought about what that goal is, but on Sunday, we laid out all of the steps that we could take that would help advance our progress. And on Sunday, we slotted times into our weekly calendar that we would allocate, that we dedicated to working on that goal. And at the end of the night, every night for a week, we reported how much time did we spend. And what we found was that thinking in a broader, wider unit, using wide bracketing, was more effective. In fact, on average, this group of guinea pigs and I found 2.5 more hours that we actually did, not planned, but that we actually did allocate towards tasks that are relevant to our long-term goal. And this tactic was effective for 66% of people. So thinking more broadly, thinking in wider time units, planning with a wider scope was effective for preserving or for finding time. Because when you just think about the day, the emails that come in, the seeming emergencies that other people want to throw at us, they take precedence over the things that we think, I'll find time for it, I'll work it in today. But if it's not already in your calendar, other people's demands on you oftentimes will take over what you know you personally need to accomplish. This is not just this case study, this sort of larger case study has found support, is also supported by more scientifically rigorous evidence. This was replicated within a study of academic advisors that are working with students. And they met with them for several weeks, for several months at the beginning of a new semester. These advisors met every week for 3 months, in fact, and had some students think in wide brackets, the more effective strategy that we found. They took their flow chart of concrete actions that they needed to take and milestones that they needed to meet, and they blocked that out for each month. Other students took a more narrow focus with their advisors. They set milestones, but those were daily milestones. They thought in terms of the day. Both groups actually were less likely to drop out of college than people that did not participate in either form of goal planning. But the students who learned to plan using the wide bracket, who set those monthly milestones rather than daily milestones, actually earned a higher GPA. It was a full letter grade advantage that was conferred upon those people who thought in terms of a month rather than a day. The monthly planners had on average a 3.3 grade point average, while daily planners at the end of that first semester had a 2.4 GPA. So, that was essentially the same as the GPA for students who didn't make plans at all. So I'll just put out there that when we're thinking about how do we want to structure our time, we can just recognize that we give priority to those things that are in our calendar. And if we can give ourselves, buy ourselves, allow ourselves the opportunity to schedule time for ourselves and those tasks that are relevant to our own personal goals, and put that into our calendar, we are far more likely to stick to that, to commit to that, and to not let other people chip away at our time. If we have seen it, we've allocated that time, we've committed to that time for ourselves within our own calendar. Our own time is just as precious as the time other people want to take from us. And if we can allow ourselves not to try to find that time within today, but instead to plan it further in advance, like thinking about the week, then we're more likely to not only find that time, but to continue to keep that time free for us to do what it is that we need to do. I recognize that we want to have time for the Q&A, so I'm going to leave us with just one last tidbit before we open it up to questions, and that's thinking about multitasking. Who is for it? Who likes multitasking? Who thinks that you should do it? Who recognizes that they do it? probably all of us, right? Yeah, I see some hands going up. I'm guessing that's to say, yep, I do it. I think we should do it. I can't get away from doing it. Maybe you don't like it. We would all love to be in that flow state all the time, I'm sure. When you find yourself like loving a concert that you're at, or you're in the flow state of writing some paper that you've been really excited about, that the data have all come together in just the right way, that's a wonderful experience that we rarely give ourselves the opportunity to feel. Most people believe in multitasking. If you look, yeah, we do it all the time, and it might not be by choice. Exactly. There, I looked through Monster.com, the global online recruiting leader. There was about 300,000 posts in 1 month before COVID that I looked at. And employers want multitasking. That's among the most common traits that are called for in employees. Employers think that multitasking is a good thing and they want to see it in their employees. But is it a good thing or is it not? Like most of behavioral science, the answer is nuanced. It's not just yes or no. There's a really cool study done of emergency room doctors. This was done, this was looking at emergency room doctors, 145,000 patients that physicians saw in a 3-year period of time coming through the ER. And the take-home message here is that multitasking can be both good and it can be bad. When the patient load was minimal for the doctors actually showed faster rates of patient discharge. Physicians were able to use the idle time that they had while waiting for test results to come in, like we wait for our data to come in, or the time that they have waiting for new patients to get processed by other staff members. There's some idle time, and what they found was that when there was that idle time, as the patient load increased, their mental resources and what they threw into it also increased. They were able to double down on their job and they worked faster. We can add to our workload when things are relatively easy, when we're doing tasks that are routine or rote for us. And if we add on some other multitasking elements in those conditions, it can actually improve our performance. Because low levels of stress that some forms of multitasking in some circumstances can provide actually can assist in our cognitive functioning. When we experience something that's new or unpredictable, out of our control, our bodies respond by producing cortisol, adrenaline, and noradrenaline. These hormones can help us. They actually impact our hippocampal functioning. The hippocampus is responsible for memory, right? For performance, for decision making. So what we found is that, what this team found is that when the physicians went from like requiring their cognitive resources be very minimally engaged to now a bit more engaged, their stress response actually led them to make better decisions and to make those decisions faster. But the problem is that the benefits of multitasking have a limit. And at some point, that mental cost of switching between tasks exceeds that benefit that the low levels of stress that multitasking can confer. Those benefits can decline. For the emergency room doctors, as their patient load grew from 5 to 6, that was the tipping point for them. The strain of multitasking became too great, and it was counterproductive, and it crippled their efficiency. More patients were discharged from the hospital without a diagnosis. That increased the rates that the patients would revisit the emergency room within 24 hours. It means their symptoms weren't being remedied. Maybe they were being misdiagnosed. They had to come back. So it's like a U-shaped function. Multitasking can be effective because of the impact on stress and stress's impact on areas of our brain that are responsible for memory and for quality decision making, but then it can tip over to being counterproductive. There was a really cool study also, last one that I'll share, that was looking at how often do people task switch. Researchers followed lots of different people within an organization, from high-level leaders to relatively entry-level employees. And every time they switched what they were doing, the researcher noted it and counted how much time before somebody was working on one task to switching to another. We know that there are costs to task switching. You have to turn off what you're doing, re-engage a different thought process, pull up different memory systems to engage in a new task. And there are costs. There's time and efficiency drains when we switch between tasks. What they found was that on average, people are task switching every 3 minutes. every 3 minutes, we're putting aside something to focus on something else. We're not giving ourselves the opportunity to get into that flow state that so many of us actually enjoy. And because there's a cost to doing that, there's time costs, there's efficiency costs, we're actually doing ourselves a disservice. And that rate of once every 3 minutes drops to once every 2 minutes if what we're doing engages us on screens, which of course it does. That's our life, especially during the pandemic. So we just need to think about this, about what is multitasking doing to us. Sometimes it can be effective, but I bet for the most part it's not. I bet we are overusing this multitasking tool, and that we probably can try to just be more conscientious about when we're using it, how we're using it, and try to turn off those things that are pulling us away from that opportunity to really dive into something that might require more of our resources. So the last tip then is just that I'll offer is when you are prescribing multitasking to yourself, think about using it when you're doing something that's really easy or familiar so that you can engage those minor stress experiences to change your cognitive functioning, but focus up when the job is taxing or when it's new, or when you find yourself engaged, especially on screens that are probably going to pull you out of being able to focus up. And that might put too many demands on your cognitive system to do the best job that you can. So I will stop there. Just to sum up what we've talked about, the takeaways: set goals that are challenging but possible, to dream big, plan concretely, but foreshadow failure. That's the 3-step process that should happen at the goal setting stage. And think about time in wider units. And finally, multitask when it's easy, but focus up when it's hard. So I'll stop there and look forward to your reactions and to some questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thanks, Emily. That was wonderful. And with that, we open the floor for questions from the audience. Emily, one of the questions I noticed in the chat box was, what was that one song you learned on the drums?
Yeah, that was a big decision in and of itself. My husband is actually a drummer, not professionally, but he's really good. So I had a live-in teacher. He said, first step, choose the song. I chose a U2 song, Bloody Sunday. It has a really repetitive drum beat. I thought I was being really cheeky and cool. I only had to learn one riff and I could play it for 4 minutes and I could be, U2's backup drummer. He said, no, that was actually really hard. There's a reason why U2 is as great and as long-standing as they are, because it seems simple, but it's really not. So he suggested a band called The Outfield and a song called Your Love. Odds are most people haven't heard of it. John is nodding yes, that maybe he has. It hit number 6 on the UK's Billboard Top 100, like in the late 80s. It's not that cool of a song. When I asked him, like, will this be cool to tell people I learned? And he said, no, it's not a cool song. It's not a good song, but it's my song now. When I was about 6 months into learning this song, I heard it on TV. It was recently re-released as a jingle for dryer sheets. So confirming that, yes, it is not a cool song, but it is my song and I can rock it.
Perfect. And we are still waiting for questions from the audience, so feel free to raise your hand and ask. But Emily, one question I have for you is, as you know, most of the audience today is professors, and most of us struggle with getting more done, right? I mean, one more paper, one book, as you mentioned, family responsibilities, all those things. And what's the one thing in your book that really helped you sort of achieve more?
Yeah, I mean, I would put it out there, venture to put words in your mouth, that probably, like, living through the last year and a half has just been an incredible level of stress. Like, my university didn't say, oh, I understand that your life is really hard, let's put less on your plate. They were like, no, we're outsourcing all of our stress onto you. So your life is now going to get even harder. And we don't care that now you're homeschooling your children. You still have to figure out the solution to all of our problems as well. So there are some, of course, great benefits to being an academic, and there's some flexibility that, like, my husband, who works in corporate America, didn't get through the pandemic, but I did not find that my life was any easier. I felt really overwhelmed and just on the brink of, meltdowns for the last year and a half, even though all of us were healthy and we were in a safe place and we were so fortunate and privileged to not have to worry about those aspects of our life. But it was really challenging. So I had to figure out a new solution for me during this time. And that hasn't like decreased at all now that we're all supposedly vaccinated and there's no more pandemic, right? We just wear masks now, but we're fine. I still feel that sense of overwhelmingness. And you know, I had all kinds of electronic systems to keep track of what do I need to get done? What are the due dates? Who am I collaborating with? Who owes me? Who do I owe some work to keep projects moving forward, especially writing projects? And those electronic systems just weren't working anymore to reduce the anxiety that I kept feeling. I just constantly felt like I'm drowning, I'm drowning, I'm drowning. You know, my Asana communications and my Slack communications and my own to-do list and my own calendar, like 4 systems that were fully integrated to try to help me keep track of this, weren't letting me feel any better about the progress that I was making. So I added on an old school, like, notebook. It's usually right next to me. I was just looking for it, where I also keep track of the stuff that I need to do. And I like literally cross it off. And I've never been a person who uses those kinds of pen and paper to-do lists. And they're probably not as efficient, because if I lose that notebook, then this whole like system that I figured out to help me feel less anxious is gonna, you know, it's whatever. At least I have all my electronic backups. But what it does is that I don't rip out those pages. So when I have these moments of feeling like I have gotten nothing done, it has been a whole month, and I still haven't had like another submission to a journal yet. And how am I ever going to come up for promotion? And how are my students ever going to get a job? And all of that, I can like, you know, the wind blows my notebook, or I'll just flip through it and be like, okay, despite the fact that I feel like I've gotten nothing done, look at all this shit that I actually did get done. Look at all these things that are crossed off. And when you use at least the electronic systems that I use, they don't let you do that, to retrospectively reflect on a wider unit of time to see the progress that you actually got, that you actually made. So for me, the problem, and I do write about other aspects of this in the book, is that when we're trying to rely on our own memory to assess our progress, our memories are faulty. We have a psychological immune system that helps us in other ways, but doesn't help us necessarily here. We give credit to the most emotional experiences. And for me, you know, making important but incremental progress doesn't stick in my mind. So when I'm reflecting on how much progress have I made this week on X, my memory is not helping me there, because it's only like the submission that matters. It's the acceptance that matters, but not the like, major analysis that didn't work, that you still have to go through that process of exploring. You don't give yourself mental credit for that. So I was feeling incredible anxiety because I couldn't, my brain wasn't letting me, and my electronic accountability systems weren't letting me actually get a good sense of what have I done. And so that old school approach, I'm not saying everyone needs to go back to pens and papers and notebooks to keep track of what they need to do, but finding a way for you to get it, to reflect on daily data, but in aggregate, to actually accurately assess progress over time is really important. And then you'll have a better sense of whether you actually are, you know, accomplishing what is reasonable for those things like getting another publication out, or meeting a timeline, a timeline of deadlines that you have for a collaboration. We can't rely on our memories. We all know that memories are faulty. And if we want to be able to manage our anxiety better, we certainly can't rely on them. And if we actually want to be good accountants of our own work, then we need to be able to look at data in aggregate about our own performance that's collected at the daily level, because our memory won't give us an accurate sense of that daily data when we're trying to reflect on a month's experience, for instance.
Yeah, I haven't done a good job with to-do lists too, but I think that my takeaway from your answer is to have that to-do list. But we have questions.
And not throw it away, right? That's the important part, is that you can see what happened in the past, and that's important.
Yep, I'm going to do that. Irfan, do you have a question for Dr. Balcetis?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to ask the question. Actually, I have a question. I'm a young scholar. Suppose you are in a situation where you have a very high pressure in your life from your family, from your, PhD, from your supervisor. First thing, how do you handle that pressure? And then second thing is, if you have never-ending problems in your life, how you gonna deal with those problems, and how you gonna, maybe not permanently, but how you gonna disassociate yourself from those problems, maybe temporarily, so that you can focus on your, the core work?
For me, what has been helpful is understanding the impact. Like everyone says, oh, you just have to learn to say no. But it's like, yeah, but until it's your boss telling you and you still have another layer of promotion to get through, you're not going to just say no, right? Like that advice doesn't really work. Except what has helped me to at least say no to the things that are possible is realizing the impact of not saying no. So when I started to look at the data, especially with cortisol, right? So cortisol, like I was saying, with multitasking can be beneficial. When you add a little bit of stress to a totally otherwise not stressful situation, it can help engage the cognitive systems that we need to make better and more efficient decisions. But cortisol, and there's other parts about cortisol. Cortisol is what literally transitions us from being asleep to being awake. That's important. I can't just sleep through my day. So cortisol isn't all bad. But it is a stress hormone, right? And if you live with a chronically higher level of stress, you increase the odds of cancer, of cardiovascular disease, of inflammation that then gives rise to all other kinds of health consequences. People who literally can't say no. I mean, there's a survey, like, a self-report survey that's like, when my personal demands start to get greater, I don't cut back on my professional responsibilities. Lots of iterations of that kind of statement. People who agree to those kinds of statements that like, I'll just add on more to handle my personal responsibilities because I don't want my professional world to know it. Those people live with chronically higher levels of cortisol throughout the day. People have done studies looking at, it's about 20% higher through every time point throughout the course of the day. It starts high for everybody because that's what happens when we're awake. It drops over time, over the course of the day so that we can fall asleep. But at every single time point, it's 20% higher for people who say that I won't cut back professionally when there's increased personal demands that I'm experiencing. And it's those kind of data and knowing what cortisol and chronic stress can do to my body that's making me realize like, that's literally burnout. This is burnout, right? And increased morbidity, right? I'm not going to die from my job. I'm happy and proud to be at New York University, but it's not worth losing 5 years of my life, right? Or having my retirement years spent dealing with the effects on my body that chronic stress can cause. So that has given me like the impetus to try to figure out, okay, I have to say no to some things that might be like, oh, that could be cool. I'm not really sure. And I could say no, I will say no. So that's not really an answer of like, how do you handle it when somebody keeps saying, do this, do this, do this. And we have to figure that out for ourselves. Who can you say no to? Which situations can you say no to? But that's helped me realize like, I have to figure that out because the job is not so rewarding that it's worth my life, literally.
But sometimes you come across certain problems which are maybe, which have been going through, since a long time, but you don't have a control over those problems. And maybe, in the present situations or circumstances, you may not be able to solve those problems, but how to keep yourself disassociated from those problems, maybe temporarily out of those problems so that you can focus on the other work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's lots of different thoughts here. The one that works for me and one that is scientifically supported is just thinking about our multifaceted self that we do. They're different components of our life. And when one is feeling out of control, and it literally is so that you cannot do something or you do just have to wait, and that's stressful to just sit in that waiting place because sometimes that's the case. Then, there's other aspects of our self-identity that we can try to prioritize at that point. I feel so lucky at the end of the day that I have a 4.5-year-old who doesn't care at all he doesn't know what a department chair is. So he couldn't care less about how stressful my relationship with that person is. He just wants to build a Lego rocket ship. And it's like, okay, for a half an hour, I can throw myself into that world. And then after I put him in bed, go deal with that. And that is the mental break, that compartmentalizing that, you can have a kid. Kids aren't great always for managing stress, but there's some aspects of finding other elements of your identity that, our science has shown can be effective for managing the stress that one facet might pose. That multifaceted self is a coping strategy that we can take advantage of. Again, trying to stop the multitasking. Don't try to be both X person and Y person simultaneously. Allow yourself to be X if X puts you in a happier place for a half an hour.
Thanks, Emily. With that, we go to Dr. Archana Tiwari with her question.
Thank you so much. Emily, I would like to say indeed, it's a wonderful session. right? And my question is, right, sometimes as you started the session by explaining the fact that everyone fails in life, right? So we set the goals and sometimes we are not able to achieve those goals. So sometimes there are certain, urgent issues, some, personal challenges are there, which actually needs your attention, right? So can you suggest some strategy how to restart? Do we need to, again, we have to set a goal again from the scratch? We have to start how to give it a kick?
Yeah, so sometimes we need an extra kick because we've hit the end of what is possible. And that idea of disengaging from a goal or a means to a goal is like a relatively new area of research, underdeveloped area of research. So if you're interested in any of this kind of stuff, that's a great place to focus your attention, because there should be a lot more work that's done there. Goal disengagement. A lot of the times the problem is that, we are in the positions that we're in as professors, having gotten a PhD and being at a university, that's a lot, right? That takes grit, it takes perseverance, and it takes chomping in and not letting go of something that probably most people would have been like, forget it, this is too hard and not worth it. But we didn't say that. So that perseverance is probably the reason that we're in this position right now, which can make it really challenging for us to disengage from either a means to a goal or a goal that does require it. So a lot of the research that's out there looks at the consequences, to encourage us to try it. Don't be so afraid to say, I'm done. And you know what? It didn't work out. Because, they've looked at what are the effects on people who've gotten a cancer diagnosis and accept that rather than trying to continue to fight it, or whose relationship has broken up. And do they try to get back with that person, or do they allow themselves to move on? And of course, people are healthier when they accept circumstances that they can't control, like a cancer diagnosis or a relationship breakup. The other thing to just think about is that sometimes goals just need a new means, right? That we might continue to go down this singular path and that path isn't working. But what we need to do is go to a high level of construal. If you follow Yakov Trope's research, take a step back and try to see, okay, this is where I want to be, and is there an alternate means to getting there? And when we just doggedly try to continue doing the same thing over and over again, we don't give ourselves that opportunity, on a sabbatical or even just a weekend to try to think more creatively about a different means forward. I realize we're out of time, but one last great example is just Vera Wang. We know her as the queen of tulle, of wedding dresses, her fashion empire. When you look into her backstory, that's not where she started. She was a figure skater on an international level. That's what she wanted to do for her life, is be the world's best couples figure skater. And she was really, really good, but she didn't ever make it to the top. She could never win first place at the most prestigious of international competitions. And so she stopped at some point after having invested, from 8 years old to 20 something years old. She failed at that goal. But she doesn't think about it that way. Some people would say that she failed at figure skating. She never made it to the top. And she literally threw that career away and started over. But in her mind, she didn't. She took a year to go to the Sorbonne in Paris and regroup and think about alternate means to getting out of life what she wanted. And for her, she says, I've always been in love with the art of line. So in figure skating, you are cutting lines into the ice, and in fashion, you are cutting lines into fabric, or you're drawing those kinds of lines. So she doesn't think of it as having failed at one and restarted an entirely new career. It was an alternate means to the same goal that she's always been passionate about. So if you find yourself lucky enough to take a year off and go to Sorbonne, that might work for you, or whatever approximation of that experience is possible.
Emily, if you don't mind, we'll take one last question from Dr. Maura Mills. She's my colleague at Alabama, so she gets the last question.
Hi, thank you, Emily. This was fantastic. I appreciate it. And thank you, Michelle, for organizing. So I know you saw my question in the chat and you answered it kind of by saying you still have this ongoing to-do list telling you what you still need to do, right? And I love the idea of reflecting on your progress with pen and paper notebook, and I have done that at times, and it does make me feel better. And definitely has some useful benefits, like reducing anxiety and that sense of non-progress that I think we can all get caught up in. That said, do you imagine that it has this kind of potential downside also of maybe complacency is probably too strong of a word, but also maybe reducing drive as it chips away at that anxiety a little bit too.
Yeah, but I actually think that that's important, right? Because especially in our world, that you're never done. There's always something else that you can be studying, that you can be writing about, that you can be sharing somewhere. So our life is not set up in a way that gives us these sort of natural stopping points. It's always just like, okay, got that sent off. Okay, now work on the next thing, work on the next thing, work on the next thing. And, for our students, we might realize like, oh, this is a big moment for them. This is the first time they've submitted a paper. This is their first acceptance. And we might take a moment to pause and acknowledge and celebrate that, but we don't do that for ourselves. I don't do that for myself. It's just like, oh, thank God that thing's done. Now I can move on to the next thing. But we should, right? We acknowledge that it's important for our students to like recognize this moment, this big moment for you. And we should keep doing that for ourselves, because having that little break is important for keeping, continuing to run the marathon or the ultra marathon that is our life. And so we have grown complacent with our continued workload and not taken those moments to rejuvenate or, to celebrate us sending off a paper to a top tier or a second tier or a third tier journal. Getting that done should be recognized, and taking a half an hour to do nothing but just like celebrate that. We deserve that too. And that is important for continuing what is the ultra marathon of our career. So I appreciate you saying the word complacency. And I actually do think that we should be a bit more complacent than our life tends to be set up for us to experience.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Thank you, Emily, for your time. Would you be open to connecting with our audience on LinkedIn or other,
Yeah, of course. Yes, please.
Thank
yes,
you.
I would love to
That.
continue the conversation.
And, go ahead.
Yeah, I would just love to continue the conversation. This has been really great. Your questions, of course, are the best part of this, is seeing how people read this and react to this and push on these topics. So yeah, I would love to continue this, however that happens.
Sir, good evening and good morning. I am Divakar Singh. Ma'am, I would
you,
like
Emily.
to know.
With that, and everyone, EM will be hosting other learning activities for the rest of the semester. Please do join us, and please join me once again in thanking Dr. Emily Balcetis for her time today. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you.